Welcome, football fanatics, to the First and 10 Club. I'm your host, Mark D., and the first round of the playoffs is complete. 6 more teams have headed to vacation. In the first section, we're going to talk about those 6 games, recap them, talk about some big news going on in the NFL right now, and then, of course, we're going to look to the divisional round of playoffs. We'll talk about what games we like, don't like, players that we think you should go in on for DFS purposes, and then when we run out the clock, we'll talk about some pretty big things going on, at least in my world right now, when it comes to the NFL and football. So, let's get things started. Let's recap. We're going to bring out my homerism. We're going to start with my game, first and foremost, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Washington football team. So, a lot to talk about in this game. And first, we're going to talk about the Washington football team. Yeah, they didn't get it done. To be honest, I wasn't really that surprised. They're a rebuilding team. They've got a bright future. But the things that need to be brought about is, one, Taylor Heinicke. This guy was signed to our practice squad about 4 weeks ago. To be called into action for your first career start against a Tom Brady-led Buccaneers team in the playoffs. This guy played with not only guts, grit, and determination, but he actually looked like he belonged on the big stage. Now, I'm not part of the Washington front office, and I sure as hell am not saying that you should go into 2021 with him as your starting quarterback. But the guy deserves a contract. The guy deserves a chance to be there to compete, because he sure as hell has shown that he can at least serve as a valuable backup, worst case scenario, number 3 on your team. And that doesn't come around very often. What he does have is that it factor. We're going to talk about that more a little bit later on in the show. But there's a bright future there in Washington with a hell of a defense and just some really good pieces to build around. Antonio Gibson has got a bright future in front of him. Terry McLaurin, you guys already know my feelings about him. But let's talk about the team that won. Now, cough, cough, there might have been a little bit of favoritism when it came to the calls this week, but I don't get too hyper-focused on that. Calls were missed every week. There was a couple of phantom calls against Washington and a few very blatant calls against Tampa Bay that didn't get, caught, seen. I understand why people get a little bent out of shape in regards to why they think games are fixed or why the refs favor certain teams. It's evident. It happens. But when it comes down to it, Washington kept the game close. And, regardless of it, they just didn't come out. I'll never be one to say, calls cost the team one way or the other. They could have played better. They could have made more, plays. The Bucs' offensive line was really the star of this game. And people may not realize that or might not say that, but one, the Buccaneers hit a home run with Tristan Wirfs, their right tackle right now, a gem out of this year's draft, but facing a very daunting front four with depth in Washington. For the most part, they did a phenomenal job of keeping our pass rushers at bay enough. Now, we did get to Brady. He was hit. He was sacked a few times. We were trying to do what you need to do to rattle Brady. It just came down to it. It just wasn't enough right now. And Washington's just not there yet. Now, hopefully they continue to grow and build. What happens now for the Buccaneers? Well, the rust did not seem to be there. Tom Brady does not look like a guy in his 40s. He does not look like a guy that's on the outs. This is a team that has a lot of depth and I believe really can make a run here in the playoffs. So we're going to have to see. Brady's poise is the X factor heading into these games. And that's going to be the interesting thing to watch. It's not you're not going to rattle him easily. And in the NFC, you have 3 quarterbacks that are still left in it, in Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, and Tom Brady, that they come out there and they operate. and that's going to be anything. There's going to be some great games coming up here. Final score, 31-23. So they met the spread, whether it was push, however you want to call it. But like I said, Washington could keep it close, and they did. Washington showed that they belonged. With all the negative commentary that came into this game because, they didn't have a winning record, and, the Eagles laid over and gave them the NFC East, Washington proved that they belonged and that they could compete with a good team. So, no complaints from a Washington fan here. Really, probably the first time in a long time I'm going into the offseason not infuriated at the team. So, hopeful for the future. And, the Bucs, well, we're going to talk about them a little bit more later on the show. The next game we're going to touch base on was the first playoff game of the season, the Colts versus the Buffalo Bills. Now, this was a 51-point over-under, which just missed. Vegas knows what they're doing. 51 points. Bills were favored by 6. Well, they didn't cover the spread. What they did do is they got the win. Allen to Diggs, big plays, really just hammered it out. The Bills made plays where they needed to, and that's how you win in playoff games. The jitters are gone. If there were any jitters about the Bills getting their first playoff win in God knows how many years, I think since 1995, if I remember correctly, those jitters are gone. And I still feel that the Bills are probably one of the most dangerous teams in the playoffs this year. The connection between Allen and Diggs, those big plays, the home run shots, the needed possession, receptions that are there, that connection is the storyline this year. As far as the Bills go, that is the reasoning why. That trade is the off-season or NFL move of the year. They don't give that award out, but if they would, that's absolutely the one that you should point to. The other side of the ball, well, look, I'll be honest. Indianapolis is a very good defense. And, Josh Allen was able to kind of matriculate through that and operate at will to a certain extent. But what it really came down to in this game was you saw a bright future for Jonathan Taylor, and something became very evident to me. A lot of times we hear the debate as to who deserves to go to the Hall of Fame, who is, that next level of quarterback. And the reality of it is Phillip Rivers, as much as he's had some amazing statistical seasons, especially when it came to fantasy, he's just a jag. He's just an average guy. He's not an elite quarterback. I'm sorry to say it, but he has had some of the most prolific teams in the NFL, and he hasn't been able to get it done. We talked about the it factor in the last game, and we're going to talk about the it factor quite a bit, and I just don't think he has it. It's unfortunate, but, the Bills came away with the win on this one, 24-27, much closer game than I anticipated, but still a win is a win. Now, talking about games that I thought would be close or, things that, might have been a little more interesting, heading into the Rams and the Seattle Seahawks. A lot of people in the beginning of the year felt the Seattle Seahawks were the team to beat. The way the season started, Russell Wilson was the odds-on favorite for MVP. And then for some reason, the wheels just came off. This team was never the same after Week 11. They ran into a Rams defensive system that is probably the best in the playoffs right now. And as far as the Rams go, it will be on the heels of the defense. Why do you say that? Well, so for starters, John Wolford was the quarterback to start this game. Jared Goff was the emergency quarterback. The guy basically doesn't have a thumb on his throwing hand. And, well, within the first few minutes of the game, Wolford gets knocked out of the game with a pretty significant head injury. He gets sent to the hospital. Well, in comes Jared Goff, and he manages, and believe me, the guy was not right. He was not right. He was not throwing the ball like he could. Did not look right. But there was a will there. They wanted to win. They wanted the desire. They were not giving up. They found a way, and they leaned on the defense and the running game. Cam Akers is coming into form, exactly what we thought he could be all season. And the Rams D is just phenomenal. The Rams D that pretty much stuck it to the Seahawks throughout the game and was with a half without Aaron Donald, who has separated rib cartilage. So enough can't be said for what's going on there. Seattle, I don't know what the issue is there. I really don't. It's really hard to put a finger on it as to why the wheels came off or what went wrong. For some reason, Wilson and Metcalf, it seems like Wilson only goes to Metcalf when the game's on the line. It seems like Metcalf is not the focal point of the offense early on. And I don't know what the coaches in Seattle are missing here, because he is a man-child. He is a beast. He has the opportunity to be the hands-down best wide receiver in this league, if not the best, top 5, but absolutely should be the focus of your offense. And it seems like it's we run the ball, and we go deep. There doesn't seem to be any middle ground there, and that's a problem. That's a massive issue when it comes to running an effective offense in the NFL. So what happens? Seattle gets eliminated 30-20. The game really, honestly, I don't even think was as close as the score alludes. It's definitely on the over. Seattle obviously was favored. That was the upset there. But Pete Carroll comes out after the game and says, in his early reflections, that he feels they need to run the ball more. I don't even know what to tell you there. I really don't. Because, honestly, I don't see how that's the solution. It also said that Kyle Schottenheimer is going to stay on as the offense coordinator. Well, then I start to think, maybe we found our problem with Seattle. Maybe the issue in Seattle isn't necessarily what's going on in the field, but what's going on off the field. Pete Carroll's been there for a long time, and yes, he had 2 very, very good years. But those 2 good years were really predicated on phenomenal defenses. It's never really been this amazing offense that was earth-shattering. And let's face it, in today's NFL, that's really where the trend is going. So Seattle, can make the choice to stay in this archaic mode of offense. But it's a shame because you're wasting some thoroughbred players in Russell Wilson, DK Metcalf, even Chris Carson. And I don't know if Chris Carson returns to Seattle, but they have some interesting decisions to make with free agents. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because we'll have season recaps throughout, the offseason. But it's interesting just, to recap that Seattle just really fell apart. Going from what seemed to be a very predominant favorite or definitely a lot of people's pick to represent the NFC to just not even looking like they belonged, to be honest. All right, so moving on to another team that we thought was going to be representing potentially their conference. It looked to be a powerhouse. We had the Baltimore-Tennessee game. Now, Baltimore came into this game with kind of all the hype, if you want to go with that. The over-under on this game was 54.5 points. And to be honest, we expected that. We expected this to be a absolute showdown, back and forth. Well, you got to give credit to Baltimore's defense, who came up with a game plan to take away King Henry. Derrick Henry just did not look to be himself. He never really got going. And to be honest, the best running back in this game was Lamar Jackson. Oh, wait, all right. I'm sorry. Lamar Jackson is the quarterback. But is he? I still have a hard time thinking that he is an upcoming elite quarterback in the NFL. To me, Lamar is a great gadget quarterback. He is the premier version of a Taysom Hill. He's a hell of a running back. Part of me is extremely curious to know what it would be like to actually have him as a running back. Could you imagine a backfield that had a legitimate quarterback, then lined up with a J.K. Dobbins and Lamar Jackson on every play? What an interesting wrinkle. For one, would be pretty perplexed as a defensive coordinator to try and figure out how to defend that. But I digress. Right now, Lamar Jackson is just an average QB. But his versatility and running ability make him a severe threat. And it's part of the reason why the Baltimore Ravens really can win almost any game, especially with the defense that they have. Now, the game was not a blowout. It was not high scoring. Tennessee lost 20-13. And if I have to say why, or I have to point to an area, the one thing that absolutely blew my mind was Tennessee not being able to get it going. And I think Mike Rabel was absolutely outcoached. There has been a number of times where a team is trailing in the fourth quarter, in between the 30 and 50 yard line of the opponent, and in the fourth quarter, with less than 4th and 2. And there's only ever been one time that the team trailing did not go for it. Want to take a guess what game that was? That was this game. He punted. Now, I don't understand. You have potentially one of the greatest play action threats in the league. It's 4th and 2. You have Derrick Henry, King Henry, 2,000 yards. You don't go for it? That's a head scratcher to me, Coach. Talking about head scratcher moments and coaching decisions throughout the year, we're going to go on to the team that really just stunned me that they even made the playoffs. Were the Bears and the Saints. And as much as Washington limped into this year's playoffs, I really do believe that Washington deserved to be there more so than the Chicago Bears. And facing the Saints, who were favored by 10 points, the Bears just didn't show up to this game. And despite the game being close a little bit early on, they just weren't there. I'm talking, you're on a playoff game. You've made it to the dance. Dropping a wide open touchdown in the end zone? You don't win playoff games that way. But here or there. As much as the Bears didn't deserve to be there, I think they would have easily made it in the playoffs if Matt Nagy would have just stayed out of his own way. I still don't understand why they ever made the switch to Nick Foles when you had a 3-0 team. That goes down as one of the all-time craziest moments in coaching for me. When you have a 3-0 team and you bench your starting quarterback, only to eventually put him back in and, well, make a run to the playoffs. Limping, dragging, but getting there. The Saints win this game. The Saints move on. Now, this is pretty much commonly known to be Drew Brees' farewell tour. Now, it's not official yet, but I think we all realize it's coming. And in all honesty, maybe an end of an era in New Orleans. I'm not sure what happens with Sean Payton. There are a lot of other players there. One thing I have noticed, there definitely does seem to be a disconnect, as much as it's been speculated and talked about, between Michael Thomas and Drew Brees. Now, sure, Michael Thomas had an amazing game. But usually you see some form of camaraderie and celebration between a quarterback and a wide receiver after you catch a touchdown pass. It's cold as ice, as Farner would say. That's going to be something that bears watching moving forward. Because those types of things, not having that connection, not having all the parts oiled and moving in the same direction, those are the little things that cost you in the playoffs. And that might mean the difference between a win and a loss. And then the last game. the last game of Wild Card Weekend. The game that, I'll be perfectly honest, I was dead wrong. Dead wrong. All the credit goes out to the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland rocks. The Browns versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Oh, the Browns barely won in Week 17 against the Steelers B squad. The Browns dealt with COVID issues all week. They didn't even get to practice. Oh, that's right. Their head coach wasn't even allowed to be on the sideline because of COVID. So I don't know who deserves more credit here or where the attention should be given. Is it Cleveland for winning a playoff game and pretty handily winning a playoff game? Or is it the Pittsburgh? The fact that you couldn't pull this out at home, that you weren't prepared for a team that didn't get to prepare. Everyone called the Pittsburgh Steelers frauds throughout the year. Well, congratulations, Pittsburgh. You didn't do a damn thing to prove anyone wrong when it came to that. So the Cleveland Browns put on a hell of a show, putting a whopping 48 points on the Steelers. 28 unanswered in the first quarter. 28-0. Turning the Steelers over left and right. And I'll give them credit. The Steelers came back swinging. They tried to fight back. They ultimately lost by 11 points, 48-37. Well, you have to ask yourself the question, regardless, they played well. The Steelers had some injuries halfway through the season. There are going to be a lot of excuses that are made. But I'll tell you right now, this is my hot take on it. The problem in Pittsburgh is Ben Roethlisberger. Now, he's a hell of a lot better than Mason Rudolph. Hell of a lot better than Dobbs. But I'll tell you right now, Ben Roethlisberger, he's not taking the Pittsburgh Steelers on the stairway to 7. It's not happening. He looks like an old man. He moves like an old man. Yeah, he can still huck the ball down the field. That's great. But I think it was pretty evident here that, what the weak link is to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think it's Ben Roethlisberger. It'll be interesting to see, with a lot of quarterbacks potentially on the move, a lot of quarterbacks potentially on the trade market, if Pittsburgh agrees. Now, Ben has said he'll be back. But I guess the question the Pittsburgh Steelers have to ask at this point is, do they want Ben back? So, like I said, it was a pretty interesting wild card weekend. But probably the most interesting thing from the wild card weekend was something that really had nothing to do with the actual outcomes of the games. For the first time, Nickelodeon, Children's Network, broadcasted the Chicago Bears-New Orleans Saints game. Now, I'll be perfectly honest, I thought it was stupid. I thought it was lowbrow. I thought it was just dumb. For me. I'm not going to sit there and I'm not going to watch Nickelodeon and CGI graphics of slime exploding in the end zone when somebody scores and SpongeBob SquarePants' likeness in between the field goal posts. Nope. I thought that was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. But I'm a pretty good avid fan, and I'm a purist when it comes to football. With that being said, I hope they do this every week next season. I hope there is one game every week next season that's covered by Nickelodeon. Because what it did was give a new way and a new platform to introduce kids to the game of football. Not just how you play it, not just going out in the backyard with dad and learning how to catch a ball and throw a ball, but actually getting them interested on their level and their platform and what the rules are and how the game is played. And I thought that was pretty inventive, and I think that was a pretty cool thing to do to kind of switch things up a little bit. I don't have an issue with it happening. Again, I'm not their audience. I'm not going to watch it on Nickelodeon. However, I think it's a really cool thing for the youth and the kids that are just getting to know the game, even if they know the game, to be able to watch it at kind of their level. And I'll be perfectly honest, I thought some of the commentators and some of the commentary was better than, some of the pros that do it. I won't, say any direct names, Booger McFarland, but, some of the people that we watch and we just find cringeworthy. So, hats off to Nickelodeon. And like I said, I hope that comes back. I hope it's not the last time that it exists. I won't say the last time I see it, because I probably won't watch it again there, but I hope that it's something that continues for people who will enjoy that platform. So, that wraps up Wildcard Weekend. Now, there are a couple of things that need to be talked about in regards to the underlying stories from the weekend. And the first one kind of came out right after Saturday's wildcard games, but it's out of Houston, the Houston Texans. And the crazy thing about it is, as insane as this season has been for the Houston Texans, the offseason, as fresh as the offseason is, well, just made everything a lot crazier. As their Pro Bowl, league MVP candidate, Deshaun Watson, has basically said that he wants no interest in playing for the Houston Texans anymore. And I think that's probably the biggest story to come out of Wildcard Weekend. Now, the interesting thing that relates to this story is we already know and blame O'Brien, their former coach and acting GM, for the atrocious, lopsided trade that sent DeAndre Hopkins to the Arizona Cardinals for basically a washed-up running back and a ham sandwich. They have zero draft capital because they have tried acquiring players and they've given out draft picks like they don't matter. And everybody put the blame on O'Brien. And look, don't get me wrong, I'm not taking him out of the blame, because ultimately he was the acting GM and coach and should have voiced something. But the name to know here, and it's in circulation right now, is Jack Easterby. This man has no business being involved in football operations. This man is the reason that players, DeAndre Hopkins, quietly Deshaun Watson through his agent, former players, are coming out and berating the Houston Texans, calling the franchise even potentially racist. So who is he? Well, he was a chaplain. That makes sense. From chaplain to executive, making day-to-day decisions. Well, to talk a little bit about the history of Jack Easterby, basically in his wake, everywhere he goes, he brings failure and destruction. And I'm not saying that he goes into personally sabotage, but what he is doing is he doesn't care. The guy doesn't know football. The guy doesn't have a clue when it comes to football. And he doesn't care. Somehow this man has become the greatest hustler. And when I say hustler, I don't mean that he is working to advance himself to get better. No, what he is the hustle. He's got a hustle where he somehow convinces people, ownership groups, higher level executives, to give him opportunities and chances. It doesn't matter what destruction he leaves in his wake. This is the man that is behind DeAndre Hopkins being traded. He couldn't even use his name. The research I've done, he couldn't even use his name. He referred to him as that guy. Our wide receiver. Now, you know my feelings when it comes to general managers and treating players with disrespect when it comes to names. A la Bruce Allen and Kirk Cousins. Kirk. I'll say this much. If I was Deshaun Watson, I'd want out of Houston faster than anything. I'd agree to renegotiate my contract whatever it took. Because this man kills careers. This man kills franchises. And I'll tell you right now, I feel bad for Texans fans. I feel bad for what's coming for the Houston Texans. Because their future is not in good hands. Talking about coaches and franchises, I said last week that I still believe there was going to be a fourth coach that would get fired. The funny thing about it is the two coaches that I thought might be the candidates to go weren't one of them. It was a coach that not only a week or two ago was suspected to be safe, as the Eagles parted this week with Doug Peterson. Now, does Doug Peterson deserve blame for what happened this year in Philadelphia? It's really hard to say. Philadelphia was ravaged by injuries, and the main area where they were absolutely destroyed and ravaged by injuries was the offensive line. When you're basically starting third stringers across your offensive line, it is very difficult to have a successful franchise. But ultimately what it came down to was, well, Jeff Lurie and the coach, just couldn't get on the same page for the future. So Peterson's out. Now, I do think he will end up getting a coaching job this year. I highly doubt a Super Bowl winning coach is going to remain on the market very long. I don't know who won here. I almost think that the reason that Doug Peterson is gone is because of Carson Wentz. I think Jeff Lurie wants Carson Wentz in Philadelphia. And I think he realized in order for that to happen, he needed to let his coach go. So now you have a whole bunch of moving parts as the season progresses. One, who will be the next coach in Philadelphia? I know they're looking at bringing in the defensive coordinator from San Francisco, but I've also heard Deuce Staley's name mentioned quite a bit. Eric Bieniemy is another possibility. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that develops as we move forward. Does Carson Wentz ultimately still get traded or not? And if he does get traded, well, what's the offense going to look next year? Because I think it's very hard to just all of a sudden pretend that Jalen Hurts didn't show a lot of flash this year. So, 4 coaches fired, 7 total. The question now is, do we get to 8? Does Matt Nagy start the year on the hot seat, or does he not even make it to the season? And then, of course, you do have your other situations. Coaches can retire. Coaches can ultimately be let go for weird reasons. So it'll be interesting to see if there's more to come. So, all right. Well, we talked about what happened in the first week of playoffs. But let's get to what really matters, the good stuff. Let's start talking about the divisional playoffs that are coming this weekend. Now, the sad part about it is it was great last weekend. You had full days, Saturday and Sunday, basically noon to night. A football, well, unfortunately we won't get as much this week because we only have 4 games now. But we got some great ones and some tough picks this week. The first one we're going to look at will be the number 1 seed, Green Bay Packers, facing the 6th seed in the LA Rams. Now, the Rams shocked the world, knocking off Seattle. We talked about that already. They've got a quarterback with a bum throwing hand. But what they do have is an amazing, amazing defense. Now, I don't know if Aaron Donald plays or not. I think the competitor that Aaron Donald is, and heading into the week, I believe, come hell or high water, he finds a way to suit up. So, really, the most intriguing thing in this game is really going to be that defense versus Aaron Rodgers. So I love the Adams matchup. Adams versus Ramsey. That's just get your popcorn ready TV. If you are a fan of the NFL, that's the pairing that you want to see all game. So Green Bay right now looking to be favored by about touchdown, 7 points. Over under 46 on this game. Well, here's what I'm going to tell you about the game. First things first, I'm absolutely taking the over in this game. I know that the Rams have a phenomenal defense, but you saw against Seattle that points can get put on the board. Keep in mind, 50 points were scored in that game. And let's face it, I think Green Bay's offense is going just a little bit better right now. So, absolutely take the over in this game. Now, Green Bay, though, I'm a little nervous in this one, to be honest. I think that there could be a little bit of difficulty here. The Rams have a very strong running game, and it's scheme. It's system-oriented. It's not necessarily the running back. And Green Bay struggles against the run. The other thing that is to note here, Green Bay just lost their starting left tackle. And that is a pretty significant storyline going up against this Rams defense. So I think ultimately Green Bay gets the win, but I think it's a really close game. So I would take the Rams here with the points. Ultimately, I think the Packers pull the game out, definitely over 46 points. And like I said, all 4 of these games are going to be great games to watch. Heading to the other game in the NFC, the Saints versus Tampa Bay. So really, the question here is, can the Saints figure out a way to win 3 in a row? And I don't necessarily know that they can. Like I said, the Saints, although they've gotten some wins, they don't look like they're seamlessly firing on all cylinders right now, and Tampa Bay does. They also get some key players back from the COVID list. It's yet to be seen if Ronald Jones is able to go. They thought he was going to go last week, tweaked the hamstring in warm-ups. But even if Ronald Jones doesn't go, you still have Leonard Fournette to lean on. And Tom Brady, well, that's the storyline in this game. It's Tom Brady versus Drew Brees. Yes, they're 2 of the senior members of the quarterbacks in the league right now, but 2 of the best to ever play the game. Right now, 51.5 points in this game. Honestly, here's my kind of kicker on this one. I think this game's under. I don't think it's going to be this crazy shootout game. And I think ultimately Tampa Bay wins this game outright. So, heading to the AFC. Now, this is where things get a little interesting. I still believe that Buffalo is the team to beat. I know they're not the number 1 seed, but I said coming into the playoffs, they were playing with a purpose. They looked focused. But the one team that I said kind of had that same focus, that same getting hot at the right time momentum, was the Baltimore Ravens. And I really kind of hoped that they weren't going to have to face them. Fortunately, Cleveland knocked off Pittsburgh, and that means, well, in the divisional round, it's the Ravens versus the Bills. And I think this is the most interesting matchup. You have 2 mobile quarterbacks. But as crazy as it sounds, Josh Allen is really the better quarterback of the 2. He's taken so many strides this year, and a large part of that, as we said earlier, is because of Diggs, but his efficiency and his completion percentage is through the roof. He seems ways to will to make it win. The defense here, I think, is a little bit of an edge to Baltimore, but if you go the checks down, edge, quarterback, running backs down the board, it's almost a complete draw. It's a coin flip for me. The points on this one, 50 points, absolutely taking the over here. Buffalo right now, it's basically a pick 'em. Buffalo's favored by 1.5. I think Buffalo pulls this out. I really do. I still think this is their year, but man, this is going to be a crazy back and forth game and a lot of fun to watch. Even more so than the last game of the weekend, or the last game we're talking about, which is Kansas City and Cleveland. And the question is, does the Cinderella story continue for the Cleveland Browns? Are the Browns able to knock off the number 1 seed in the Kansas City Chiefs? A lot of people, when Pittsburgh was getting a lot of grief about playing a fluff schedule or being imposters, a lot of people came out and said, well, Kansas City's right there. Keep in mind, some of their losses were a little crazy, particularly the first one. There's other teams that weren't that great that kind of took them to the wire. So, can Cleveland keep it going? Well, you do have a revenge game narrative, supposedly, and Kareem Hunt going back to Kansas City. I think that's really being overblown. Although Kareem Hunt has said that, he wants Kansas City. Well, I just don't see it happening. I'm sorry, Browns fans. But I just don't. Kansas City is a powerhouse, and the one area that you have struggled against a little bit has been tight ends. And I hate to tell you, but potentially, the offensive player of the year is coming with potentially the MVP. Kelsey and Mahomes, it's just going to be too much. And I don't think your defense is enough to stop them. I do think there's a lot of points scored in this game. The over-under number is pretty high in 56. Ultimately, I do think we go over that. Though I will say right now Kansas City's favored by 10 points, and I'm taking Cleveland with the points for betting purposes, but Kansas City wins this game. In my opinion, there is no question. This is Kansas City's game to win. No, dear. So, that's our picks for the week. Players, now if you're playing DFS, if you're looking at, where do you want to go? The players that I'm going for a position, QB, absolutely Josh Allen. I think he has just a ton to prove. He's coming through week after week. Running backs this week, love Cam Akers this week. They're going to have to lean on the running game. Green Bay struggles against the running game. He's been getting it done. Wide receivers that I'm going after, man, there's a ton to pick from. So many good ones that are still in there. I like Chris Godwin. I think Godwin is going to, he gets to go up against Williams. I think he's going to find a significant amount of success for Tampa Bay, and I think that's going to be the guy this week, because let's face it can be anyone on that offense. There's probably 5 or 6 options. I think it's Godwin this week. And tight end, we just talked about it. It's Kelsey. You can't go away from that. Kelsey absolutely, I think, smashes this week. And those are the 4 that I like. That's the direction I'm going this week. So, with that being said, hey, it's time to run out the clock. Now, there's 2 things I want to talk about in running out the clock before we get to our final nail down. The first off, we talked about the Nickelodeon game. And as great as that was and everything, how about the boneheaded move to not have a time delay and to let Cordell Patterson drop an F-bomb on a children's network? If he didn't get a chance, he basically was disagreeing with the referee's call as he was announcing it, and you heard him drop the F-bomb clear as day. How about a big oops there for the Nickelodeon network there for not thinking about putting a little bit of a time delay on there to prevent things from like that happening? You won't want to see that happen on any game, but you sure don't want to have it happen on a kid's network. And then the second part of my running out the clock here, we talked a little about the it factor. And I don't want to beat a dead horse over this too much, but we talk about the it factor numerous times throughout the season on the show. And it really does come down to probably the most important quality in sports. If you gave me a team of players that had the it factor, maybe not the best athletes, maybe not the elite athletes, but they all had that it factor. Taylor Heineke showed the it factor this week. And if you haven't gotten a chance, if you didn't watch that game, Google it. Find video of it somehow, some way. Because his ability to elude pass rushes, escape, rush, again, his name's not Lamar Jackson. It's not Kyler Murray. This guy was barely hanging on to a football career. But man, did he look like he belonged in the NFL. And it's that it factor. It's just, it's you know it when you see it. Not to, overuse the word. But man, having guys like that on your team, guys that have the it factor, that come out there and play for the team and not themselves, that's special. That's what makes fun being a fan and being able to cheer those guys on. That's how you basically get the fan base to fall in love with you. And now for my final nail down. No, dear. I know I said earlier in the show that I don't blame and I don't, cry boo-hoo about the refs and games. But I sure as hell hope, that the refs can get their crap together heading into the divisional and, of course, the conference playoffs and, of course, the Super Bowl. Because there's nothing worse for a fan base than to have blatantly missed calls or questionable calls decide these games. The beginning of the year, the refs were doing a phenomenal job of calling even games, letting teams play it out. And it seems that now on the biggest stage, as we get to the playoffs and the end of the season, Well, it seems like they're forgetting that. It's kind of concerning to me that you miss a blatant face mask. Not a brush, but literally a blatant face mask. Grab, pull, twist when you're standing right in front of it. What are you looking at? Sharpen your game up and come prepared to do your job. So as fans, we don't debate whether or not the refs blew the call, which ultimately affected the game, but we just talk about the game. That's all I have to offer this week. Look forward to talking to you guys next week, and we see how the divisional rounds fared. Maybe we get some new breaking news. If you like the show, as always, click subscribe. Make sure you follow. Questions, hit me up in the comments. And with that, it's been a pleasure. For the First and 10 Club, I'm Mark D. Let's go football.